Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. And my guest today is Captain Larry Edward Van Hoose, who has a MA, and also he's pretty, he likes to be called Captain Larry. He don't like to stand on any kind of preliminaries, I guess you might call it, or anything like that. But he's the author of a book called The Voice, What the Bible Reveals About Reincarnation. And I'm in the process of reading this book right now myself, and it's quite a lot to take in. And I got to tell you, from my perspective, what I've seen so far is this is one of the most well-rounded books on this topic I've seen to date. I mean, he actually places you in the actual time frame, the way that he's written it, with the actual people that were actually involved at the time in writing the scriptures and, you know, actually took part in everything. You'd have to actually read it to see what I'm talking about, but I was really impressed with it so far, and I can't wait to finish it. Now, he wants to begin this with a narrative that's going to take 10 or 15 minutes, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have him introduce himself real quick and maybe give you a quick synopsis about why he got involved in this topic, and then he can lead right into his narrative from there, and when he's through, he'll let me know, and we can just decide where to go from the narrative. Okay, Larry, Larry, what are you doing? I mean, how are you doing? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm fine, Red. Just sitting down here on the boat, all tied up secure at the pier, and I'm hoping the broadcast is coming out clear and crisp. So having said that, what can I tell you? I got started in this some time ago. I saw the effect that the study had on my father, and once he began to understand reincarnation, it made a big, big change in his life. Later, I got my degree, and I did get a master's degree in transpersonal study at Atlantic University in Virginia Beach, and they study aspects of the human being as if there is an actual soul, as the old-timers used to call it. And, of course, this soul is immortal and can choose to sometimes come down and live on the earth as a human being, and much the way that energy can change into matter, as Einstein had mentioned so well. If we think of the soul as being energy and our human body being matter, well, of course they can interchange back and forth. Now, leading into that, we generally have most human beings have three approaches to the question of is there survival after death. About 10 to 20% of our population believes that there is no life after death. You only go around once, and that's the end of it. In biblical times, these folks were known as the Sadducees. About 80 to 90% of our population believes that there is survival after death. And about 40% of those people believe that there also is an existence or reincarnation. You actually exist before you're born. Now, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the issues they have is that they just don't have a proof that there is such a thing. The Sadducees of today, we call them materialists, and they have all these fancy gadgets and scientific instruments to say, well, we can't detect anything out of the material. And the answer to that is, of course, well, your equipment just hasn't been proven to work in non-physical realms. As far as the Pharisees, they have no way of saying that anybody goes to heaven or goes to hell, depending on how they've been, other than just religious tradition. Now, there's this third alternative. In the old days, among the Jewish community, they were known as Essenes. They were known in the intelligentsia of the time, which were the Pythagoreans, as they called them, after the Greek philosopher Pythagoras. These were the people who lived in what we call pre-existence. So, and today, like I said, they make up about 40% of the people, which is a big, significant minority of those who believe in the life in the hereafter. All we're saying in all this in this presentation that nothing is new. I'm not going to present you anything that's new. It's just a matter of the way that it's been presented. I hope that everybody accepts my findings, but of course that's not going to happen, or at least not in this incarnation. But there's no, what am I going to say? I use very mainline methods of research. I handle science, Orthodox history, and long venerated verse. There's no curveballs in any of this. There's no cause for a jihad. And I'm hoping that the most metaphysical of metaphysicians, or the most scientific of scientists, or the most fundamental of fundamentalists are just going to see the difference, discuss using similar ground rules, and at the least, most will understand how a person can believe in both the Bible and reincarnation. And hopefully, future issues will be resolved or differences narrowed in the same manner. So in the way that a present researcher can dialogue, a Baptist can dialogue with a Lutheran, or a New Age Christian with an evangelical Christian, or a Sunni Muslim with a Druze Muslim, or a Hasidic Jew with a Reformed Jew. Just, we're all being reasonable people, agreeing to disagree on different points if we might, but we respect each other's faith and move on. So now a little bit about this narrative. This is a story of Elijah's return as John the Baptist. That's more or less how I've titled it. Are you all hearing me out there okay, Red? Is the sound coming through?
Well, I can hear you just fine, and I'm pretty sure everybody out there in the listener land can too, because usually they hear pretty much what I hear.
Right, okay. Well, like I said, I'm on the boat, and the thing broadcasts from at or below the waterline. Sometimes I have to move things around just to make sure. All right, well, listen, it sounds like things are pretty good. So here we go. A couple things as we're running through this is to think about your own thoughts. Are you going to see this material as a Sadducee, that is a materialist, or as a traditional Judeo-Christian Muslim, or are you going to see this as a New Ager? I would imagine that most people listening tonight are already pretty much tuned to reincarnation. So, again, all I've done here, I've taken a scientific method of inquiry that was developed at the University of Virginia by a fellow named Ian Stevenson. He was a psychiatrist, and he interviewed young children who had claimed a previous life. And I just took his methods and applied them to the biblical personalities, and what we get is pretty much what you're going to hear now. So, with a roll of the drums and a little applause, let me run this by y'all.
Just real quick, like before you start, I wanted to let you know that Leslie confirmed that he could hear you okay.
Good. Okay, Leslie, here we go. And everybody else. Okay, now John the Baptist is one of the best known of the people that we have evidence might have had experienced a past life. The biblical evidence suggests that he had one then been the prophet Elijah. And the first issue of the evidence is that John appeared to have fulfilled major Old Testament prophecies that Elijah would return to proclaim the Messiah. And the 40th chapter of Isaiah the prophet opens with such prediction. Elijah is referred to as the one who will, quote, prepare the way of the Lord. And the book of Malachi, a very fiery book, closes on the same subject. It prominently reveals Elijah's coming return as the final promise of the Old Testament. In the book of Malachi, like I said, it's the very last verse. And it starts, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet. Okay, so now we come to the New Testament. And suddenly in Luke, who opens with some 70 chapters devoted to the birth of John the Baptist out of 80 verses concerning the return, this has got to be something to take a look at. Now, John's father is named Zechariah. He's a temple priest, and he would be told by an angel that his wife would bear him a son, and he would be named John. Again, as much as I can, I like to use the biblical verse verbatim so that everybody knows that you're getting the right straight stuff here, and it's not overly diluted. But he says, the angel Gabriel, by the way, he says he will go before them in the spirit, that is the people, and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of parents to their children. Zechariah, the father, is left speechless until after his birth. Now, 6 months later, his wife Elizabeth receives a visitor, and this is, of course, Mary. And as we're getting in towards the Easter season, some of these verses, if you're all going to church, these will come out to you right away. And Elizabeth, when she hears Mary, makes a notation that the babe leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And behold, when the voice of your salutation fell on my ears, the babe in my womb leaped with great joy. Okay, now moving on, the earliest New Testament editions began with St. Mark. And in introducing John the Baptist, he opens his gospel in addressing Elijah's return. And he gets, as you notice in this review of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, I like to use the term, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah, behold, I send my messenger before your face, that he may, quote, if you'll notice, prepare the way. Now that the Old Testament ends with the promise of Elijah's return and the New Testament begins with the issue, which seems significant. Like we said, Luke devoted some 70 verses out of 80 concerning John's return. Now, the other Gospels, there are a total of 4, likewise address return as their first order of business, except for St. Matthew, and he addressed it in his 3rd chapter, again with a similar introduction to John the Baptist. For you'll see who is said by the prophet Elijah, the voice which cries in the wilderness, and again, underline this, prepare the way of the Lord. Now, not everyone is aware that the New Testament once began with Mark. However, most accept as historical fact, as will be shown, that significant numbers and even a majority of early Christians believed in reincarnation. And Matthew's later placement before Mark has been criticized as clouding the dramatic connection between Elijah and John the Baptist. I can't comment on whether that distraction was deliberately attempted by misguided authorities trying to get rid of reincarnation in the Dark Ages. I just don't have the evidence to make that stick. What all I'm going to say is reading all 4 books uses about as much time as it does to take in the Super Bowl. And if you want to take in a real Super Sunday, try reading the Gospels, and there are no commercials there, save the message that we love one another. Now, getting back to the biblical prophecy, persons of faith cannot get around the promise of biblical prophecy, nor can this statement of Jesus. He proclaimed that the Old Testament prophecies concerning Elijah's return came true in John the Baptist. Now, Jesus is very specific about this. He reads, for all the prophets in the law prophesied until John. And if you wish to accept it, he is Elijah, who was to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. There's none of this about in the spirit of, or the spirit of Elijah rests on John or anything like that. He's very specific, saying this is he. Now, as we begin to look at these 2 characters, that is Elijah and John, they have similar skills and behaviors. Elijah was an eloquent orator. Isaiah addressed him as being the one who he addressed as just being the voice. And then when we get to Isaiah, again, the voice of him that cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. St. Mark honors John the Baptist in a similar manner, says the exact same thing about him. This is the voice which cries in the wilderness, make ready the way of the Lord. Now, Elijah also was a bit of a prankster, and his wiles are still the delight of Jewish folk tradition. And we seem to see John reacting in a similar-minded mischief. He was faced by the temple police, and they had the authority to arrest him, as it would have been politically risky for anyone to have said he was Elijah returned. This is a no-win situation, and Elijah/John just pretended to be crazy in the way that David used a similar ploy to get out of his fix. So this testimony is given by John, and he's unique in that he probably was there when all this happened. And you have to remember, if you're claiming to be Elijah returned in a time like that, and then you're going to announce a king who is of the lineage of David, and the king in power is not of the lineage of David, well, then you got a real problem. You're going to get locked up real fast. And the temple police at the time had the authority to actually crucify somebody. So you understand why John has to really stand on his toes. So John writes, this is a testimony of John, when the authorities sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, and they said, who are you? Now notice of this convoluted response he gives. Well, John confessed and did not deny it, but he declared, I am not the Christ. Then they asked him again, what then? Are you Elijah? And he said, I am not. Are you a prophet? And he said, no. Now that the ruse worked, the scene of many of that time saying of John the Baptist, and he was a historical being, he was a real guy, they just said, he's crazy. Well, John the Baptist was and still is famous for his verbal articulation. At no other time except this time and his days in prison did he ever use such strange wording. And I think this, that when sure he's convinced the cops he was harmless and feeling that sure the danger had passed, in sharp contrast to his previous words, of course after they had gone, was this exact, precise statement of scriptural eloquence. And he says, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, straighten the highway of the Lord. As you begin to notice, these phrases begin to run together and make you begin to think that maybe this is one of the ways that the Bible uses to reveal previous and past life personalities, using these little connecting verses that identify both. Now, moving along, we find that Elijah possessed unusual wilderness skills. The Old Testament claims that the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. And John the Baptist also seems to have had such skills. His food was locusts and wild honey. These guys seem to have survival skills very similar. Elijah was a big guy, and he wore distinctive clothing. He was a hairy man of girth with a girdle about his loins. And John was also impressive and was the only New Testament figure who also wore a similar dress. And it just simply states, John wore a dress of camel hair with a girdle of leather fastened about his loins. Well, hint, hint. Now, there's another biblical character. That John is not the only one, and this is Herod Antipas, or Antipas. Now, he should not, first of all, he should not be confused with his infamous father, Herod the Great. Herod is a royal title meaning hero. Now, the evidence begins with the understanding that individual souls possessing unfinished between them often return during the same time period to iron out their leftover issues. And clues to Herod's formal existence are seen in the complex political, personal relationship between himself and John. So it was the same thing as we see in Elijah and the Israelite king of that era, and his name was King Ahab, and you've probably heard Ahab, the Arab.
Yeah.
Okay, and Captain Ahab on the book Moby Dick. All right, now Ahab generally gets bad biblical press, but in the scribes and in real history, they conclude that actually he was a very evil Middle Eastern monarch. An example in the Bible is that Elijah is shown running before the king, and sometimes that's interpreted to say that Elijah was so powerful that he could outrun the king in his chariot, but when the scholars look at it, they just say this is another way of indicating that the runner, that is the one who's preparing the way of the king, as as John the Baptist would do later on, this time the king being Jesus. He's just offering homage. So these two guys are very close with each other, and you'll find that if you read those chapters in 1 Kings in the Old Testament. Well, at any rate, they would have a falling out in their relationship. There was a character named Naboth, and he owned a vineyard. Now, keep this Naboth in your mind. Don't forget it as we go along here. And he had been executed on a trumped-up charge of treason, and his estate was taken by the crown. Now, supposedly Ahab's wife, Jezebel, and of course you've all heard about Jezebel, supposedly devised a plot to steal the land, and Ahab failed to intervene. And he gets tagged as being one of the most evil persons in the Bible, and of course they always blame it on the woman, which supposedly what he did was look the other way, and his wife, Jezebel, had incited him to do it. Anyway, Elijah and Ahab part. Elijah later is honored going to heaven by being taken bodily to heaven by chariots and fire and so forth and so on. And in those times, if you were Mithra of Persia, Romulus, the founder of Rome, and Caesar Augustus, they all recorded these guys as being taken into heaven. As a matter of fact, the entire Roman Senate, to a man, swore up and down that Caesar Augustus was taken to heaven in a chariot. And, of course, if you can't believe your senator, then, who can you believe, right? Well, anyway, the next time they met would be as John the Baptist and Herod Antipas. Now, like Ahab, Herod generally gets bad biblical press, though the press of secular history regards him as a very able Middle Eastern monarch. And there were some good things written about John the Baptist and Herod, and that Herod respected John, and he had done many things, and he knew it, and he heard him very gladly. Well, Like Elijah and Ahab, John and Herod also had their relationship reach a tragic turn. It was a tragedy which Herod's, like Jezebel, had incited. She had threatened the Baptist's life, that is, Herodias, this new gal, after he had publicly demeaned her recent marriage to Herod. Now, this forced Herod, because of John's popularity, to place him in protective custody. Now, this brings on the third character, Herodias, and we've all heard of Herodias, I think. Herod's wife was named Herodias. In the same way that John had exhibited past life similarities with Elijah, and Herod showed similar links with Ahab, Herodias would resemble Jezebel. And like Jezebel and Elijah, who had grappled, Herodias and John would also be in conflict. And the conflict would begin some 850 years before the trio of Elijah, Ahab, and Jezebel had returned in this time period as folks who were born again. Now, I don't know what they did between their lives. The Bible doesn't say much about such abodes. And I think the idea is that the Bible wants to address those of us who are living on this side of the grave, or time's side of the grave, as my ancestors used to put it. And also, you won't find biblical views that, as in some Hindu sects, the humans return as animals. And thus, while the three didn't continue their feud as lions and tigers, they may have reappeared individually in non-biblical settings, and at other times, just like all of us, and surely saw realms outside this world, which Jesus spoke of as in my Father's house are many mansions or rooms, as the Bible typically goes. Now, in his previous visit, again, if you're not familiar with the story, that's why I'm taking the time to run this by you so we can all kind of land on the same page when I get through here in another couple of minutes. Elijah had staged a mighty feat on Mount Carmel, and this brought back to dominance the worship of the traditional God of Israel known as Yahweh. There was a contest set between him and his religious rivals, and Elijah challenged them to have their god, known as Baal, produce a flash of fire and bring rain and end a 3-year drought. Now, when Elijah failed to answer, Elijah's turn was next, and he poured vast amounts of water on the altar, and he was baptizing the sacrifice there, which was sort of like a steer at those days, called a bullock. Thus his name is the baptizer, as Elijah's name is the baptizer. Well, the flash of fire comes down, and it's grand, and it's spectacular, and the people are bowing down, and they're all joining, saying the Lord, He is God, and the next thing we know, everybody's happy, except for one thing. You would think that forgiveness and an opportunity for the religious conversions of his rivals would have seemed, at least to a compassionate person, the right thing to do. But for some reason, Elijah, in a not so eloquent manner, there's no eloquent manner in which human beings can be killed, killed these people in just cold blood. And the biblical passage notes that Elijah, but not God, said, seize the prophets of Baal, and they massacred all of them. Now, as for Baal worship, it existed for centuries and was seen in countless Mediterranean and Middle Eastern communities, and this included Israel. We know today from archaeology. Am I going too fast, Red, or kind of sipping in?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Matter of fact, anyway, Leslie just said he's not having too much trouble hearing you.
That's what we want to hear. Okay, Leslie, this is for you, buddy.
James said the same thing.
Okay, Jane, I got you. All right. Was that Jane or James?
James.
Okay, James. All right, anyway, about half the population of the Israelites, as they were known back then, worshiped these little gods. A considerable portion prayed to Yahweh in times of war, and then they honored the Baalim, the little nature deities, when they were planting. Most of these, like I said, were fertility figures, but then there were a couple of big shots. One is Poseidon, the god of the sea, and of course his wife, the patroness of mariners everywhere. These were included. Now today, we know this particular goddess as Venus, and she was also the goddess of love. Now, among those honoring love in Israel was a young queen Jezebel, and we've all heard this is probably the worst woman ever to walk down the streets of Laredo or Jerusalem, who knows. Anyway, like Herodias, she had just recently married before encountering Elijah. But unlike Herodias, Jezebel had become a high holy priestess in this worship of Venus. And when she heard that the murders of her beloved men of the cross, she sent Elijah a death threat. And I don't need to give you exact biblical verses here, but it just says, I'm going to get you. And then when Elijah heard this, he was afraid, and he fled for his life, and he became the voice that you hear us talk about that cried in the wilderness. And what did he cry about? What happened? As an evolved, what we call an avatar, he would have felt that from the deepest levels of his part that what he did, committing murder in the name of God, wasn't the right thing to do. So he knew that no divine protection would be forthcoming, and Jezebel's curse was to remain written in the scriptures. And this little phrase, as it is written of him, the Roman Catholics among us who might consult the Jerusalem Bible notes that they identify this as being reincarnation, and then moving on, not even saying anything more. Well, at any rate, Elijah goes on, and he uses the fire of the Lord and kills 2 captains and 100 additional souls. Now, these had been Israelite servicemen, and their loyalty was rightly with the king. Now, Elijah has to be confronted with the consequences of his error, because if he remained unaccountable, well, then following generations of Bible believers would continue to believe that his actions and the killing of others over religious issues and political issues was the right thing to do. Now, to underline this, because I get some people who say, well, they were the bad guys and they got what there was coming to them because they believed in a different God. Well, Jesus is very clear about this, and this is probably one of the most important renderings in the Scriptures. It's seen in Luke that the disciples are returning from what must have been a hard day at the office in soul saving, in that they had been kicked out of a town where they were trying to set up a time and a place for the master to visit. They got chased away by an angry mob, and their first question put to Jesus was, when they got back to him, they said, would you be willing that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them just as Elijah did? Well, Jesus answered, and keep this, he said, you do not know of what spirit you are, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy lives, but to save. End of conversation on this. Got it? You know, you can't justify the events of 9/11, I don't care who you are, because Elijah had gotten away with the same thing. So, and now we begin to catch up in the story, and so that just like Elijah, John the Baptist would go up about proclaiming Jesus by saying, prepare the way of the Lord. We would see the good aspects of karma, seeing him have this wonderful position of preparing the way for a new king of Israel, and this was, of course, to be the Messiah. This also fulfilled what Jesus had said, that all the prophets of the law prophesied until John. Now, it's important for all of us, and I have an idea, like I said, most of you are seeing this for reinforcing reincarnation, but for those of you who are not, we have to remember that John was born before Jesus, and Jesus named John as Elijah. We've seen this, and I can count up the passages at least 6 times where he's made that statement. And we're clearly concerning first century events. This does not pertain to theories that we're going to refer to a messianic second coming. Now, as to the second coming, the Revelation notes that the presence of 2 prophets, but in sharp contrast to the Gospel, Elijah is not specifically mentioned, though the prophets are to have similar abilities, such as calling upon fire, and one is described as a messenger who can control the weather. It's been said of Elijah. And, of course, Elijah can make a third return. Why not? But I think that the issue is settled in these words of Jesus when he just says, Elijah has already come. End of discussion. Now, the future is going to unfold in due time, of course, and for now, our focus has to concern of how all the prophets of the law address both Elijah's positive behaviors and his shadow side in the bloody events of Mount Carmel and the deaths of the 2 captains and their men. We have to look at this in the big picture because this is all of us for our own ups and downs. The Scripture points out, as Jesus noted, that the Scripture can't be broken on all this. So now we're getting down here to the closing stretch. This scene, Mark makes a macabre depiction of John's death. It reveals that the highway was made straight. Now, what we pick up when we read these passages is that, first of all, Mark was never one to waste words, but he includes all these small, minute details that wouldn't seem very important, so why were they included? The scene opens with the seeming unnecessary mention of the persons who were witnesses. And he starts off, there came a state occasion when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet to his officials. He was turning the big 5-0 then, so this would have been a big deal. But then why waste words on such little things? Who are these officials? Okay, we have captains and the leading men of Galilee. Listing captains doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Again, Reincarnation submits an answer that these were included because two had been, along with their men, the same souls Elijah had killed. And if these are these same people, then their presence provides a picture of perfect poetic justice. The paybacks are hell.
Yeah.
We have right? Okay. Now we have another, what was her name? Salome, who was dancing, and were these, the worshippers of Baal dance was a big, issue in their, religious, things or celebrations. And the daughter of Herodias danced. Her name was Salome, and she entered and danced, and she pleased the guests and all who were with him. Now, she could have been Athaliah returned. It just so happens that Jezebel had a daughter who danced, so we could make another case for that one. But anyway, if these little details don't relate to issues of Elijah's past life, which are now to be confronted in his execution as John the Baptist, then why would they be mentioned? Another question is John's harassment of Herodias, because not even Jesus gave her a hard time, and John knew it would result in his arrest. I think he deliberately placed himself at Herodias' mercy so that he could bring about a spiritual fulfillment. And these kinds of questions will long be debated as reincarnation returns to the forefront of Western thought, and I really know that it will. But as for now, one thing is certain: Jezebel those came to pass. And the king said to the little girl, little Salome, ask you whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give it to you as much as half my kingdom. And of course, the little girl goes and asks Herodias/Jezebel return, what shall I ask the king? And she says to her, of course, the head of John the Baptist. And so it was. Paybacks are hell. Now, there's a little bit more to this story. We know that Ahab and Jezebel were big shots. But as everyone is equal under God's law, it followed that, like Elijah, they would receive appropriate rewards for their pluses and minuses as well. And good karma rewarded these two with births into high positions. Ahab/Herod and Jezebel/Herodias would see their situations change in about a New York minute. They were to die in exile after their lands were confiscated by the crown. Now, the calamity resulted over a trumped-up charge of treason that had happened to Naboth. Now, remember him. I said, don't forget Naboth. So he was the one who received the Herod family land, and he was King Agrippa. And like Naboth, who had a strong attraction to wine, Agrippa also has the same kind of thing. And you could go on and on. There's very similar types of characters that carry over. So it just offers this final message of biblical certitude. The lesson stands as certain as death and taxes, that in the end, as in heaven, so on earth, nice guys finish first. And this happened to Naboth. And life is fair, as St. Paul, he put it this way, for whatever a man or a woman sows, that shall they also reap. And I will let that go as being the lesson at hand in this little Bible story. And I hope I haven't run over too much time. And let's open it up, and maybe folks have comments or questions they might want to make. Or Red, you go ahead.
Well, I haven't seen no questions in the chat room yet, but I'll keep my eyes open for them.
All right.
One of the questions I came up with while I was reading your book is the fact that Elijah, like Enoch, was taken up. He never passed away. So how does that play into reincarnation? Because the common teaching is you come back after you die. So if a spirit never dies, how does it work with reincarnation?
All right. Well, the point that we're making at this is that we have to have the understanding that Elijah and John the Baptist were like human beings, just like you and I. And if they can come back, regardless of how they're depicted as having left, we can do the same. And if you want to say that, well, Elijah gets passed because he was a god or because he was taken up bodily to heaven, you might make that claim, but Jesus is very careful to impart to you that Elijah was a human being like us. And James, the brother of Jesus, is also very careful in stating that Elijah was no different than you and I. And if he can have these things happen to him, then so can I. And then, of course, so can Jezebel and Herodias and Herod and having been Antipas, and on and on and on. I have some 20 cases in the Bible that I have in one of the charts that list these people who had these similar kinds of experiences that we can find this similar kind of data on to suggest that who these people had been in their previous lives. So if you want, you could make the case that, I'm sorry, was Enoch, you said he might have had a special exception. You could also make the case that Elijah had a special exception. But we're also very careful that in those days it was very common to honor someone who had been a very good person as being taken up to heaven in a bodily fashion, but that was just giving them what do you call it? Some kind of special honor, just as they gave to Caesar Augustus. So, does that help to answer the question there somewhere?
Yeah, I think it pretty well does. Pardon me. That just, usually I mute those, and that one there was just hitting me just as I was speaking. And when it comes up in your throat when you're trying to talk, it makes it hard to mute right at the, the right time.
I get you. Well, listen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were fixing to speak. Go ahead.
No. I'm just waiting for you. I do speak. I've been known as the mouth of the South sometimes. So if you're not careful, I'll slip into something before you know it. Go ahead.
All right. Well, one of the things I was going to come around about here is what are transpersonal studies, and where can such a subject be studied?
All right. Well, transpersonal study is we're just studying or what we call these aspects of the human personality that are that just say that there is actually a soul there, as it did in the old days. Modern psychology and much of modern science tries to say that that there's just nothing there. There's no soul. It's all we're all a collection of protons and neutrons and what do you call it? Behaviors that we've learned, and that's all we are. We're descended from monkeys, and monkeys don't have souls, and so we don't either. But anyway, as far as some of the places where you can, if a person is interested in studying some of these things, the best place I would recommend is Atlantic University here in Virginia Beach. That's where I got my degree some years ago. That was founded by Edgar Casey in the late 1920s, and they are accredited. And they offer some really wonderful programs. There are other parts throughout the country. Another was Saybrook Institute in California, Vermont College, University of West Georgia. I have a few friends that graduated from there. Another one, University of Hawaii studies these kinds of things. And so I'm just looking, right now, academia just seems to have this fascination with all things material and proving that there is no soul and trying somehow to say we only go around once and we need to adjust our government and our ways of thinking and all these kinds of things to say that we are just animals, and we're saying in the transpersonal movement that this is not the case. The same thing with the study of psychology and psychiatry in particular. Dr. Stevenson, in his work, his idea was to offer to therapists that there's more to the human soul, the human being, than what's sitting there on the couch in front of you. And there is a soul that beats in there. There is a part, or a psychic component, as they like to say, that has lived in a previous life. And maybe that person has different characteristics which they can't explain, but these came through past life learning. Or maybe a person has a phobia. They're afraid to fly on an airplane. Well, maybe they crashed in an airplane in a previous life. And so that's kind of the movement of the whole transpersonal movement. And hopefully we will see this when academia gets tired of this incessant need to prove that there is nothing after death, maybe we transpersonalists can have a say finally. So, go ahead. What else we got?
Well, actually, I was just thinking when you were talking about that I don't see where materialists personally, I don't, where they come from, because, I mean, if there is no soul, there's nothing outside or inside, nothing other than the actual flesh and blood you see. It seems like that's kind of like asking a car to run without a battery or a TV without electricity. I mean, there's got to be another source coming from somewhere, an animating factor, you might say.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Einstein, believe it or not, was a great believer in all of these things. He's often projected as being some kind of an atheist or something, but he really wasn't. Energy and matter are the same to Einstein in the same way that spirit and matter are the same. Einstein was always, in his own words, he put it, how can an educated person stay away from the Greeks? He said he's always been far more interested in science, and as you know, who was it? Our buddy St. Augustine put it this way, and as we look at the teachings of the ancient Greeks, these were known as the wise Greeks. There's a wonderful statement here that Plato uses in describing some of the beliefs of Socrates. One of these being that certain wise men and women spoke of a glorious truth. They say that the soul is immortal, and at one time has an end which is termed dying, and at another end is born again, but was never destroyed. And the moral is that humans ought to always live in perfect holiness. And they use this term born again over and over and over again, and we're certainly going to make the statement that when Jesus was using these born again statements, he was going on that background, which was behind his own, as an Essene particularly, of going along with the Greek understanding of the time of reincarnation. And St. Augustine, we just had this conversation a few minutes ago before we went on the air. He noted this, that he called that which is called the Christian religion existed among the ancients and never did not exist from the beginning of the human race until Christ came in the flesh, at which time the true religion, which already existed, began to be called Christianity. So this idea of born again, in the context of reincarnation, it fits right in. And the question with Jesus, what was his purpose? To save us from sins. Well, what sins? You're talking about if we've been born as a baby. But if we've had karmic baggage with us, say like John the Baptist might have had, and here was a perfectly good human being that never should have been executed until you began to look at some of the things he'd done in the past. Well, the role of Jesus is he's been sent by the divine to say, hey, look, you characters here on earth, you're in too deep, and we're just going to forgive you of what you've done and give you a chance to kind of dig out of the hole that you've dug yourself in and get yourself back up here to sing with us with the stars in heaven like you did before you kind of wandered away and got lost. And, of course, that's what Christianity, I think, is all about once you have that understanding. And most of the early believers in the church had this same understanding.
Yeah, I know that it was from my studies, they had a big chasm back in the early days, but right now, Tommy in the chat room had a question. He wants to know, have you had any spiritual experiences yourself, like out of body or past life?
You know, I'm pretty much what we call a meat and potatoes metaphysician. My background, I've been, I do have a pretty good education, but I grew up in a family of salespeople and contractors. I had a plumbing business at one time and a contracting business, and if I had, I don't think it's been any thing out of the norm. I meditate, I pray. I know that when I was writing this book, it took 7 years of work, 3 years of graduate school, 4 years of writing, and I don't want to say there was any aha moment like that other than what you might say out of the norm when, hey, this passage seems just right that I just wrote or just discovered in the Bible or from a scientific source. So my psychic abilities, I don't think, and my experiences are I just don't have anything out of the norm. Maybe I should have, but that's just kind of the way, that's been my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a gradual evolution. Just a gradual evolution for me.
Well, I'll tell you what, Larry, you mentioned some meat and potatoes, so why don't I take a cue from that, and why don't we move to, what everybody here wants to know. Can you cite any other Bible verses besides the one from, the one you're referring to about John and, Elijah, in other words, are there other passages in the Old Testament and the New Testament, etc.?
Okay, well, the way we can best answer that, let me see. We can say things like, there's nothing new under the sun. Jeremiah puts it another way, before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. Well, you had to be there. Nothing new in Ecclesiastes. And if there's nothing new, and we're here, then we must have been around sometime in the past if we're not new. There's another one, what St. Paul is very good at putting, is we sow what we reap. And if these things happen to us, they don't happen to us just out of the blue. There is reason and rationale behind all this. The universe we live in works almost like clockwork, if you will. And when we get ourselves into a place like the earth realms, whatever we do, it's a cause and effect relationship. Once we get these cases of these people returning, and we begin to see reincarnation based on these searches of the histories of actual beings, I'm going to make the statement that just about everything involves reincarnation. Not every subject is reincarnation, of course, but all these passages will begin to dovetail that once you read in these histories, you can't read reincarnation out of it again. I tried to give you a few of them. I could name some others, but the important thing is that reincarnation is here, and it's in the Bible throughout in many ways and forms, and the little types of passages where you can think you can read it in and read it right out. Once you get the basic understanding through history in these cases, it's not an issue anymore. There's one big thing you probably were going to ask me. A lot of people do that. Didn't St. Paul condemn reincarnation when he said it is appointed for men to die once? Did I guess at that right?
Yeah, that did come to my mind, because that's one that I've actually been hit with by other pastors and Sunday school teachers.
Well, here's the problem. That in the past, there used to be what they called the proof context method of settling any biblical issue, or most any biblical issue, with a one-liner, like a bumper plate sticker. In this case, it's appointed for men to die once. But in modern theology, first of all, most of them begin to take this historical approach, which is one reason why reincarnation is beginning to be looked at, is because we do have types of histories that seem to mimic the types of histories we see in science, and I'll get to that in a minute because that's an important issue. But usually, you can't come up with a one-liner anymore. Usually you have to have three verses, the first one in front of what you're trying to say to prove, then the one that you're using, and then the one that follows. So when you get to this mention of St. Paul, if you follow along with that, using the three-verse consideration, that this proclamation, Paul is very clear and straightforward in saying that such an appointment to die once will take place in the very next verse at the end of the world. And you can see this in Hebrews 9:26-28. And our answer to that then is, well, as the end of the world is yet to come, certainly reincarnation can continue, while certainly outmoded approaches from the Dark Ages can't. We're in a new ballgame, guys, and it's been going on with historic approaches to biblical study for about 75 years, and enough is beginning to come up using just a Bible and a shovel, or understanding what the people believed at the times, that we're now going to be confronted with the issue of reincarnation like it's never been looked at before in our past. All this is new. And another problem with Paul also, he preached to audiences. These were people who a lot of times were Roman slaves, and he just had to preach at a very basic level for these people. And then he also had to speak to the educated Greeks of the time, or wise Greeks. And he's very careful to mention that he speaks, and this also accounts for some of the confusion in the Bible over these, but Paul confesses that to Greeks and barbarians, the wise and the unwise, for it is my duty to preach to everybody. Of course, he's very careful to impart that regardless of one's knowledge, whether one is a wise Greek or a barbarian, that the righteous shall live by faith. So you don't worry about it, what you believe so much. You just, if the study of reincarnation makes you become a better person, then go for it. If it helps to increase your faith, then go to it. But if you're happy to stay where you are, if you're happy in your church or your synagogue or your mosque, and you're being as good a person as you can be, well then go for it. You know, God is a very complex entity. It's just like looking at a diamond. There are many little cuts and facets and things we need to study. So maybe I need an incarnation as a Jewish guy, or maybe I need an incarnation as a Muslim, or even an atheist, so that you can begin to know enough about God to where we can, again, get back in synchronicity with the rest of the universe and the goodness that the universe ultimately has to offer. Does that help?
It helps a lot, but I got another one for you that I think me and everybody wants to know about. I know me especially.
All right.
Was reincarnation taken out of the Bible?
Okay, I'll make the case, first of all, that's a good question. They never took it out. What they did take out was the study of reincarnation. We can go back, looking at these stories of the Bible. You won't find changed substantially any place, other than just the normal changes of that language undergoes all the time. We have, the Hebrew Bible was written, translated into Greek, roughly 200 years before the birth of Jesus. Now, they used 70 separate scholars, each one of them working independently to come up with the translation into the Greek from the Hebrew and the Aramaic. And the reason they did that, about 10% of the Roman Empire were Hebrew, and a lot of them, because they lived in places like Spain and Europe and even Italy, they didn't know Hebrew anymore, so they had to get it in Greek. So now you have 70 scholars who are coming up with this document and we have leftover fragments here and there. There is no place that has ever been found any kind of major change in the Bible. When King James and the King James Bible was written, there's a town right up here not very far from me, about 50 miles, called Jamestown. It was named after King James. When he came up with the English translation from the Greek, he used 50 separate scholars. So where we get into the question is how come it's no longer studied? It's not because they changed the Bible, they just changed the way they studied it. They didn't look at it from these historic approaches like you've been hearing me use. But it gets to about 550 A.D., and there was a guy by the name of Justinian. Now, just a minute here. Let me just pull it. He was a real unit. And the way that they did it, I mean, there were philosophical reasons for why the more Orthodox Christian Church did not want to pursue reincarnation. First of all, a lot of them had taken up from Aristotle that the soul can't be without a body. So if a person died and the soul has to have a body, you gotta wait in the ground for some kind of miraculous return, like they told when they talk about the Judgment Day. And also, if you don't understand reincarnation, you kind of got to. It's fearful to kind of get away from the church teachings, and church teachings are controlled a little bit by the government. Church and state weren't separated that much back then. You're going to stay very close with the teachings of the Pharisees, as we said, and which Jesus condemned in no uncertain terms, and so did John the Baptist, and they also condemned the teachings of the Sadducees, who were the materialists of that day and today. But getting to how they really got it out, there was a conference called, like I said, it was about 556, and it was called for the city of Constantinople. And the issue where they went wrong is that they disregarded the presence, if you will, of the Holy Spirit. And we like to think of the Holy Spirit as maybe the active presence of God in human life. So if you feel that your faith is being compromised in considering reincarnation, then we need to look at just how this was handled. So what had happened, it was brought together by Emperor Justinian of Constantinople. Now, first of all, if you're a Protestant, and they supposedly had outlawed reincarnation, although when you look back at the records, it's not so sure exactly what they did. There was a very famous Christian theologian, the first Christian theologian, as a matter of fact, named Origen, and of course he upheld reincarnation. And he was in the direct lineage, either he was taught personally by St. Mark or his own teacher. There might have been one teacher in between Mark and Origen, so there's a very clear apostolic succession there. At any rate, Justinian, he comes in with this idea they're going to condemn the teachings of Origen. Now, as a Protestant Christian, when you see these kinds of edicts that come out of these councils, they just say, well, these are, and I'm going to read you verbatim from the Episcopal Church Handbook, which is Church of England. It just says, for as much as these councils be an assembly of men, these councils may err and sometimes have erred. So we're going to say they don't have that finding. It doesn't affect us if we're a Protestant Christian. Now, if we're getting to Roman Catholics, they also can argue immunity in that they're not bound. It's called what they call the doctrine of Caesaropapism. Now, this is not something you eat down at the Olive Garden. It just roughly translates that a Caesar, such as Justinian, can impose religious views upon the Pope. And we see this in our headlines today. The government cannot tell the church what they can and cannot do over religious issues. So what happened, to have an ecumenical council, which is what this was called, these have to be called by the Pope. Well, the Pope did refuse to call the council. He refused to attend. So right away, if you're trying to make this thing meet a test for the Holy Spirit's presence, you're going to have a pretty hard time to do it. The bottom line is just simply this, that a council can only bind the faithful if it means to test for ecumenical status. So this requires proof of the Holy Spirit's presence. So here we go. When we look back at this council and say, well, was the Holy Spirit there? What we can do, and I'm going to quote this from the book, the seeker might then consider that under anyone's doctrine of common sense, that regardless of whether the Holy Spirit is Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Protestant, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, or Roman Catholic, he, she, or it wouldn't show up for a church meeting where one, its head, Pope Vigilius, refused to attend. This thing was illegally assembled and ruled over by a man who not only had poor Vigilius kidnapped from Rome and held captive for 8 years, but mistreated that he, the Holy Father, died soon thereafter. He died for his right as the head of the church to say to Caesar that you cannot enforce these rules on us and outlaw something like reincarnation. I'm not saying that Vigilius believed in reincarnation. I kind of think that he did, but whether he did or did not, the point was you can't have a secular authority or government authority tell the church what they can believe and what they can't believe, and we see this in our own headlines today. Now strike one. What Justinian did, he prohibited the priests from marrying, though he retained that right for himself. You've got to remember, for the first 500-600 years, priests were allowed to marry and have children, but these things came up out of nowhere. Strike two was he forbade Jews to read the Old Testament in Hebrew, and strike three, he put policies which still split the mother church even to this day. And then later, he would close down all the academies of the Greek learning, which had served that region of the world for 900 years, which of course brought about the Dark Ages. So what we can say was, could such a wretch bring on the presence of the Holy Spirit? I don't think so. But what we will say, the bottom line was, and is, at least for me, that reincarnation is a sectarian issue and is not a heresy. And we will let it go from that. If you believe that reincarnation is not in the Bible, or that it's been banned by the church, got news for you, that it never happened. And when we go back and look at those, well, I'm getting hot under the collar. You can tell that, can't you? It's crazy. And yet we've gone on like this for 1,500 years. And if you dare to bring up reincarnation, if you're a young student in a seminary, I think you'd have a problem. I think for myself, I was going to go in and get a doctorate, but then when I started looking at the schools, I'm going to have a hard time making a case for that. If some of these seminaries are sponsored by Orthodox churches, and that's okay, but it'd be really an uphill fight. So I'm a captain. I'm a plumber. You have a problem with it, come on down here on the pier and we'll duke it out.
I'm ready.
Right. Oh, geez.
Well,
I hope I covered that. When push comes to shove, don't ever let anybody tell you, first of all, that the Bible has been changed. Don't ever let anybody tell you that they took reincarnation out of it. They didn't. The only thing they did, they just went around in a roundabout way of studying it. And they followed Aristotle. And if you remember that Aristotle always preached that if you thought about something long enough, you could come up with the answer. Well, he came up with an answer, and keep this one in mind, that if you drop two balls off of a roof, one weighed 50 pounds and one weighed 10 pounds, the 50-pound ball would hit the ground first. Well, nobody ever tested that theory for 1,000 years. Along comes Galileo, and he goes to the top of the Tower of Pisa, and he didn't lift a 50-pound and a 100-pound ball, but he had like a 5-pound and a 10-pound ball, and he dropped them down. Well, guess what? They both hit at the same time. And of course, he got locked up, and it's only been in the 20th century that he was forgiven for how dare you step on something that Aristotle said. So if Aristotle says a soul can't be without a body, and they've based this whole system on Aristotle, we've got some real issues there. You better look at some of the other guys. And one of the other guys we might want to look at, and maybe it's time to do that, is this question on all this work that led me to use this approach in using these historical approaches to ferret out these biblical cases on reincarnation, is a work done by a Dr. Ian Stevenson up at the University of Virginia. Were you going to ask me that somewhere down the line?
Yeah, I was thinking about it if we had time, but one of the other things I was also waiting to ask
I'm here to answer questions more than talk, so go ahead.
I was going to ask you what why is it important, whether or not somebody believes in reincarnation or whether they believe in hell or what they believe in? I mean, when all is said and done at the end of the day, aren't they really just going to reincarnate anyway, and what they believe ain't going to have any bearing on it, or does it have a bearing on it?
Well, okay, let's look at it this way. We think that thoughts are things, and what you think about, you can become. And it's just that kind of a reality. So if you can think positive thoughts, the chances are you're going to have a more positive life than if you're dwelling on the negative all the time. You're going to live longer, you're going to be in better health, all these kinds of things. The reason why at least for me, why I continue with reincarnation is that I know that I'm going to survive physical death, and I feel pretty good about that. And as a Christian, I know with all the things in my life and previous lives, and there's been a lot of stuff that how shall we say, St. Paul put it that all things are acceptable, but not everything is edifying. So that somewhere along the line, it's going to work. And Socrates put it very well, I think, for all of us. When we're trying to show that we survive death, and most people really, really want to believe this, we're just hardwired to understand it. And how people who practice hard atheism get through the night. I'm not sure. They were called Sadducees in the past, I think, because they were very sad, you see. And you see people like this, the materialists, they're so angry, so mad at the world. Everything is unfair, and all this kinds of thing. What does they say? Life's a bitch, and then you die. Well, I would like to say that maybe I shouldn't have said that on your program, but what the heck.
That's how hard it's doing you marry one, but...
Anyway, but the idea is that life is a beach, and then you ascend. But when we look at these cases, and the case for reincarnation is that we can establish reincarnation in not trying to show that someone who has died is still around somewhere. We just simply try to show that people who are alive today were once dead. And once we do that, as Socrates put it so well, and I'm going to read this to you verbatim because nobody puts it better than the ancient wise Greeks. He says that if it be true that the living come from the dead, then our souls must exist in the other world. For if not, how could they have been born again? This is the same kind of riddle that Jesus was trying to impart to Nicodemus. Temple priests back then, a lot of times they got those positions not because they were theologians, but because they had incurred some kind of favor with the king, in that case Herod. So Nicodemus could have been a retired plumber, and here he's meeting Jesus, and Jesus is running these things by them in much the same way that a Buddhist monk would run by his students, and they run these riddles, and they try to get the answers. And Nicodemus is saying, "Huh, what?" And Jesus is losing it, saying, "You're a priest, and you don't understand these things?" And then Jesus goes into this thing about, the wind blows from the east and comes from the west. You don't know quite where you're coming from. Well, he's talking about karma. And he winds up with that, saying that there's nothing new under the sun. And then I think he just kind of stomps out of the synagogue and scratching his head. Maybe not realizing at the time that a lot of the priests in there, they were there because they had their above special privileges they had incurred from the king. So at least for me,
right?
We know that whether you like it or not, you're going to be accountable for the things you've done and left undone.
I have no doubt about that in my military mind.
No, right. And you'll get a chance to put it back together again, if necessary. We all reach a certain point where it's no longer necessary for us to come back. And one reason we look at the world and we say, why does all this craziness continue on and on and on? And, I want to say, well, it's the same gang of idiots coming back, making all the same mistakes all over again. But I once taught at a school for at-risk teens, and if you've ever dealt with in prison work or with people like this, the place never gets better. And the reason is when the kid, let's say, comes in and has some real problems, and we work with him, and we give him the proper counseling, and give him 3 square meals a day, they begin to get better. And when they get better, they go on, and they don't come back. Well, guess what? Now comes a new one. And I think this is the same way with the earth. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's a place where some really troubled souls in the universe come to get straightened out. And that's what we do. As soon as we get them straightened out, they go on, and they don't need to come back anymore unless some of them choose to come back, like Elijah or Jesus, the great saints and sages of the age. But the rest of us have got a whole lot of material to get straightened out before we reach that point where reincarnation is no longer necessary. And this is where I think we need to unite ourselves with our more fundamentalist brothers and sisters, and all genders in between. What I write about in the book is resurrection. Do you want to choose reincarnation or do you want to choose resurrection? And resurrection, to my way of thinking, is that we've reached a point in our spiritual development where it's no longer necessary for us to come back to earth to learn and relearn all these lessons. Now, having said that, one of the issues you need to keep in mind, too, that in ancient times, when they mentioned resurrection in the New Testament, it doesn't appear anywhere in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. They're talking about reincarnation. That's what they understood resurrection to be. And to this day, resurrection and reincarnation can be used interchangeably. But other than the resurrection of Jesus, of course. Well, here we go. Am I covering that? I hope I'm answering some questions.
Everything? You're doing fine. I had another one I was holding over from something you said a few minutes ago. And you were talking about there's been nothing removed from the Bible. Now, I don't know if maybe we misunderstood how you meant it, or if maybe there's something you might be unaware of, but I know from my own personal experience that there was the King James 1611 version that was different. It had some 14-odd books in it that was called the Apocrypha.
Right.
That the the New King James, the Standard Revised Version, didn't have. Wouldn't that be like 14 whole books being removed right there?
Okay, well, here's how we have to look at that. That's a good point you raised, and I guess I should have specified particularly in the chapters that concern biblical history. We're talking about 1st and 2nd Kings and Chronicles, and then the Gospels themselves. Now, you can determine what you want to add or subtract. The Bible as we know it today, pretty much, with the exception of some of these things where they decided what was an apocrypha and what was the canon or the official thing, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, it was brought about by Constantine, and he wanted a standardized version of the Bible. So when he had his council, 250 AD or CE, as we say, somewhere right around there, the Bible as we know it today was pretty much right there what he had wanted to have, and he wanted to have it standardized. The Catholic Bible wasn't really standardized, or what they call canonized, until about the 15th, 16th century or so. The Greek-based Bible that Constantine put together was pretty much what we have today. And yes, you can have a few passages here and there of what was officially made official and what was made as just reading on the side. But I'll make a statement. You find in your Bible today anything substantially changed from what it was from the earliest manuscripts we have. And we have manuscripts, first of all, the Hebrew Bible, that were written, and there have been surviving copies in some of these findings at the Dead Sea Scrolls and the issue, where's it, Nag Hammadi in Egypt, and they're word for word, other than changes in language, which is normal. They're pretty much the same. The only question is what might you include as being canon, and what might you want to kind of leave out. But these passages are not of historic accounts. That's the thing. These might be commentaries. Do you have the these and the thous and the thous and the these in the right order or not? So you might want to make that kind of a statement. But when it comes to the historic things that's come down to us that pertain to reincarnation, from a historic point of view, they're the same.
Okay. Well, I can see. I see what you're saying. It depends on from which perspective you're looking at it, is what I'm hearing here. But there was some also you was mentioning. Was I going to get around to, asking you about Dr. Ian Stevenson? I'm pretty sure that some of the people out there listening probably know, but there's another part of the people out there who don't know, and I think you hit a good key that it would be a good idea to tell about him.
Oh, Dr. Stevenson?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. He was a psychiatrist, and he practiced primarily at the University of Virginia. He was given he believed in reincarnation. He said he got started because his mother also believed in it. He was his research went on for 40 years. He retired somewhere in his 80s and has now passed on. And incidentally, the president of Atlantic University and her husband, they were on his staff up there at University of Virginia before they came to Virginia Beach, and they are full PhDs. Well, he was given a grant by Chester Carlson, and Chester Carlson had founded the Xerox Corporation. So this is not pie-in-the-sky stuff. This is very scientific. He developed this methodology, and it follows along the line of what Socrates used. You just simply talk to young children. In this case, Stevenson does not go hunting for these children who have remembrances of a past life, like Mr. Leonard's kid had in his remembrance of having been a World War II pilot. But these are spontaneous remembrances that children come up with, and they're usually at a very early age, about 18 months, 2 years old, just when the kid's beginning to talk and articulate. And so he investigates these kinds of cases, and his research lasted over 40 years, and he had thousands and thousands of cases. And like Socrates, who did the same thing with a young child, you have to show that the memories that this kid have, or they be of specific times in a past life, or could they be in measurable skills that they might have that you can't explain by any other means, then this makes the case that this knowledge had to come from somewhere. And the most logical thing would be from a past life experience. But you have to show that the child could not have known about, had this kinds of memories or these skills from what we call normal means. You cannot make a case for reincarnation, say, using hypnosis, although you can get some very interesting data, and you can find people who've had hypnotic regressions to get some very positive experiences out of that. But you could say, well, gee, maybe the hypnotist somehow had imparted some knowledge or this or that. But to make these cases pure, you have to establish that a paranormal memory took place. And what he found in a lot of his, he calls his cases spontaneous cases of the reincarnation type. And what his staff did, they would wait until they heard of such cases, and then they might be in India, they might be in South America, they might be here. A lot of his cases come from third world countries, and the reason is not because they believe or don't believe in reincarnation. It doesn't seem to matter. You have to establish that the person could not have these memories from normal means. So if someone says, I'm John F. Kennedy, a kid says, I'm John F. Kennedy returned, we can say, there's so much information out there on John F. Kennedy that could have been fed to the kid that he could tell you about. The same issue with John the Baptist when he was coming back proclaiming himself as Elijah. Fraud in reincarnation-type cases for Stevenson was always the first consideration. Did somebody prime this kid with this information to feed back to us? Back then, if he said, I'm Elijah, and now we're going to have Jesus become the king, and you're the Herod there, the hero, and he's like, no, we're not going to have that either. You're going to have riots in the streets. We're going to have, we don't need that. The Romans are not going to put up with it. And the, why have civil war just because somebody has said he was Elijah when he could either be a madman or it could be set up to try to take over the government? Well, the first consideration is always fraud. But a lot of Stevenson's work, what he would do, he would try to find statistical models. And I did the same thing with the Bible cases. You have to have, 5 characteristics that are unique to that person. When you heard me read back about John the Baptist and Elijah, both of them being dressed in a very special way, both of them had very special skills like speaking, wilderness survival ideas. You need 5 unique things like that to establish. I read, if I recall, 7. So we're beyond, right away in the biblical cases, we're beyond a statistical chance factor that this has got to be something more than just coincidence. In the book, I think there are 15 or 20 of them in there. Stevenson never published a case of what he called a soft case, where there were at least 15 of those. Then when you begin to put these cases together, do they form repeating patterns? And a lot of these cases, when you look at them, they look like Bible stories in a way. There's one here that I like. There was a case in Lebanon where there were two neighbors, a man and a woman, and they constantly argued. Well, he died, and then later she seems to have borne him as an argumentative son, and they continued the battle. And, of course, the biblical lesson is to love your neighbor as yourself, so a correlation with science, because we should love our neighbor as ourselves, because in some future lifetime we might become our neighbor, which is kind of did. There was another kid in India. He bragged about being rich in his previous life, and he had committed murder, and he used his wealth to bribe the police. Well, now he finds himself as this little child in poverty, miserable, and now he's beginning to realize that his past life, perfect crime, didn't seem so perfect after all. And Stevenson reported this person, and he did follow-up studies, which would follow for years later. He became a changed person. And so a similar case with a biblical experience would be to say that if a man is not, quote, born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. You see how these things work both in the biblical and in science. And there's another one here which will help to give you an answer to what you were asking about. If a person thinks a certain way, does it really affect whether they're going to reincarnate or not? But this kid, again, he was in India, age 3, and he claimed to have once been an English army officer. He had been killed by a bullet, which entered his neck and went out his skull. He came back in an Indian family, that is from India. He had an extremely light complexion. His hair was almost white. And he had birthmarks. And this is one thing unique to these reincarnation-type cases, that if a person suffers a violent death, the thought is so strong that when they come back, very often they will have birthmarks which correspond to the exact places where the person was shot. And, you know, their death records, their drawings by police, even photographs. And when you begin to put these together, they begin to make the hair rise up on the back of your head and saying, well, there's a whole lot to this stuff. I think if you have a wound, and you'll see a picture in the book of an Egyptian pharaoh who supposedly had suffered a wound in a previous life where the spear went in his back and came out in the front. Well, an entry and an exit wound, as you know, is your military background you're telling me, Red. There's a big difference. When it goes in, it's clean. When it comes out the other end, it's pretty big. But I think we have 225 square centimeters of body. So if we have a mark, and we claim that we were shot in a previous life, and we have a birthmark there, well, that's a chance of 1 out of 225. But if it's an exit wound, and then it comes out the other side, I don't have enough fingers and toes to put together 225 times 225, but that's a big probability that what you're seeing there is the real thing. You follow what I'm saying on that?
Yeah, I think I do. Now, I wanted to mention that we've been on here for quite a while now, and I have a person that was asking in the chat room,
sure,
if you believe in E.T., and I want to add to that personally, if you do you believe we've been visited?
Well, okay, Shirley MacLaine once asked me that question. I had an interview with her some few years back, and she kept bringing up, she has a great interest in extraterrestrials, as you know, and I do too. I don't get excited about it because, look, we are the extraterrestrials. And if we have visitors coming back, I'm hoping they're coming back to maybe help us along in some ways. Jesus is very careful to point out there was one passage that I read to her where he says to his disciples, it was one of the last prayers that he ever made, saying to look out for them because, like me, we are not of the earth. We're on the earth, but we're not of the earth. So do ETs exist? They probably do. And I'm just saying, why would you bother, though, to come all across these eons of time and space at great expense and so forth, when just coming into the earth the old-fashioned way isn't maybe a bad idea? And then we have to ask ourselves, but where are these other realms? If we know that energy and matter are the same, like we're talking on this phone right now, there's a a physical thing taking place in the magnet that's in this microphone. It's going out this little device. It's being converted into energy to go find a cell phone tower and go from Virginia through the air all the way down to Texas, and then it's going to come back into your loudspeaker as a physical force again. You know, energy and matter are the same, and it may be that we're looking for these places to be, or places where heaven is, to be somewhere out in outer space somewhere, where it may be just right here, and it's only a matter of a different vibration, to where suddenly that energy is converted back into matter again. We've got whole worlds existing here simultaneously right now, and the kingdom is at hand, as Jesus said. And that's my own feeling about it. I don't get excited about it. I don't deny it. At the same time, I just say, look, guys, we are extraterrestrial. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, and also, one last question from the chat room, I think.
Sure.
It's from another author, in fact, and a spiritual teacher, Tommy Hawksblood, and he wanted me to ask you what you really think Jesus was teaching.
What do I think? I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? What do I think of?
What do you really think Jesus was teaching?
Oh, forgiveness. This is the whole key to get out of the mess we're in. Jesus came to save. He came to lift us, our karma off our back, if you will. He was empowered by this creative force that we want to call God, and Lord knows it's beyond me. This force is just like my dog cannot learn calculus. I don't think I can learn or grasp the full nature of God. But somewhere along the line, a blanket forgiveness was given to us if we're willing to accept it. And first of all, forgive ourselves. You know, as we forgive others, we forgive ourselves for all the things that we've done, so that we could begin to take a step back to where we came from. You know, God misses us. He wants us back. She, whatever. So the whole message of Jesus over and over again is forgiveness. And you look at a newborn baby and you say, well, forgive from what? From our past life experiences and things we've gotten ourselves into trouble here over. It's almost like waking us up from a bad dream, if you will. Even though our life might be pretty good, it's a whole lot better where we come from, where we came from.
All right.
Now, is a guy going to ask you, Larry, where's that $50 you owe me?
Also, now, since it's getting pretty late and I got to get up and get my son up tomorrow.
Oh, sure.
I was going to say, because I know there's a lot we didn't cover, I think you'd like to have you come back in the future. I don't have my calendar open in front of me to be able to give you a date, but would you be interested in coming back and trying to finish up where we leaving off?
Absolutely. And, you know, I do give talks and get invitations to speak before groups. I think right there on the little thing you're showing, there's a place you could press a button and it'll put you in touch with my website. You can also get hold of the book through Amazon or probably through some of your local bookstores. I think they want $18.99 for it. If you want to order it direct from me, I'm running a special. It's $20, including the freight and everything, and I'll autograph it for you. I don't charge anything for the autograph. And if you want to send it off to a loved one or just read it yourself, you can do that. If you want to get the digital version, Amazon has a deal. It's $7.77. You can't hardly put $2 a gallon, two gallons of gas in your car for that.
That won't get you a block down the road nowadays.
That won't get you a block down the road nowadays. So, and if you have any questions that we haven't covered here, I'm sure the folks can reach you, or if you want to reach my website, it's www.captainlarry.org. You know, I'd be happy to help you to answer anything I can. If I have questions of you, I don't have all the answers. Nobody knows everything about anything. But I'd love to come sometime if you want to invite this old character back. And you know, I have a daughter that lives in Texas. I've been threatening to go down there and see her. She lives in Austin. She might even be tuning in tonight. She would call in and raise the roof with me if she was, I guess. Why are you coming to see me, Daddy? Anyway, life is good, Red. I don't care. Listen, we hear all this bad news and all this stuff and on and on and on. But the future for all of us, ultimately, it gets better and better, and yeah, life is good. So keep the faith. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, listen, I really do appreciate you coming on the show, and I've really had a blast talking to you, and I'm kind of hoping that between now and the next time you come on, I'll have a time to finish that book. I got about 47% of the way through, so with any luck, I'll be through with it by the next time we speak live on the air.
I would hope so. That is a book that is, I tried to write it so that most everybody could pick it up and read it, but there's a lot of information there, and I find this, that women in particular, I have a good friend of mine just recently had a death in the family, and it was very helpful to her, and she would just open it up and read a chapter or so, then close it up, and then pick it up and start somewhere else, and go through that, and you can do that if you wish. And you start getting into some of this science stuff, and then you start trying to find the compassion, and it's a guy kind of a thing, I guess. Mr. Sensitivity here. Just bounce it out between heart and logic.
Right.
And enjoy. And when you get to the tables in the back, if you'll notice some of the stuff you've read there keyed with things you can get to at a later time and see a more direct connection over what they were when you were trying to put together, like I tried with a little narrative tonight.
Right.
But you're going to run across one. I'm going to make your hair stand on edge when you see the picture. We have this case of a birthmark. Okay, and this really puts the icing on the cake when you're talking about reincarnation studies. When you find a birthmark that coincides to where the person in their previous life had been killed, it's pretty hard to argue that one away. And like I said, if a person wants to take on the science of Ian Stevenson and say this guy is full of baloney, I got news for you. You got your hand. You can deal with me, but when you take on Dr. Stevenson, that's something else. But there is a thing in there where Pharaoh Necho, he's mentioned in the Bible, and I make the claim that he had been either Uzziah, I believe. All these names, after a while, I can't keep track of them, but he had been shot in the back with a arrow which came out at his heart. And then in the next life, he comes back, a few centuries later, as Pharaoh Necho, and this time he confronts the king of Judea, who supposedly had been the same guy in the previous life who had shot him in the back. Well, this time, he shoots off the king of Judea, almost in the same manner as how that guy had killed him. But you could read stuff in and out of that. But when you see the statue of Pharaoh Necho, and I happened to run across it, when you look at the front of this thing, and you'll see it when you look it up in the picture, if that's not a birthmark of an exit wound from an arrow, I don't know. You'll see what I mean when you see it.
Okay.
So anyway,
with
all that.
I also wanted to apologize for not getting around to your URL. I did put it in the chat room 2 or 3 times along with our phone number, and I usually mention that during the show, but to be honest with you, I got so absorbed in listening to you that I just plumb smooth forgot to say it out loud.
Listen, that's all right. I'm not trying. We save the commercial for a little bit. So I think all the bases are covered. That's really all right. People are going to run across this information here and there, but
they'll run across it because I'll distribute it.
I appreciate it. My creditors so greatly appreciate it. I won't have to hide down here on the boat for so long anymore. I'm just kidding.
All righty. Well, we're going to call that a wrap then until the next time, and I'll be in touch by email.
You bet, buddy.
Nice
talking to you.
You too.
Okay, say hello to your family and all that, and et cetera. Life is good, buddy.
You get your good night's sleep.
You too, sir. Right. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.